Given the succession of recent events, the race by Iran to get a nuclear weapon, the threats to close the Straits of Hormuz, and now the sentence to the death of American citizens. At what point do you think all these events will achieve critical mass? And what would be the trigger, if it came to that, for an explosive or military crisis? And I say this given a recent article in Foreign Affairs that says now is the time for a preemptive strike against the Iranians.
Thank you so much. I think that's an excellent question. And I think you correctly pointed out that we are in an extremely dangerous impasse right now. I would say that the optimistic view, perhaps, is that all of these different things are actually the two sides positioning themselves to maximize their bargaining position in a potential future negotiation round, because there's talk about another round of talks potentially taking place in Turkey in the next couple of weeks between the P5+1 and Iran. In that context, perhaps we can then better understand this ratcheting it up of sanctions that we've seen on our end. Obama just signed into law sanctions against the Iranian central bank. Congress is also considering additional sanctions. The Europeans are considering a full oil embargo as well as central bank sanctions. The Iranians are responding with threatening to close the Strait of Hormuz. They are announcing that they have now started enrichment in the Fordow plant, which, according to the Israelis, would be a very, very dangerous development because it would give Iranian access to a zone of immunity, in the words of Ehud Barak, because the Fordow plant is deep into ground and much more difficult to take out militarily. As well as what they're doing with this young Iranian American who they are accusing of spying. And I've had a chance to look into that case a little bit, and I've not seen a single shred of evidence to support their claim. It seems more to be far more used by them for political purposes to maximize their negotiating position in a future round of talks. But this is the optimistic view. The negative, the more pessimistic view is things are getting completely out of control. We are deep into a conflict dynamic. And the deeper you go into a conflict dynamic, the greater the psychological cost of restraint becomes. And the more additional escalatory steps come across as being justified and logical. And at some point in this conflict dynamic, the governments lose control. It's no longer the governments controlling the dynamic, it's the dynamic controlling the governments. And at that point, you have your trigger. And I know that elements, both in the United States, in the Obama administration and elsewhere, are deeply concerned about this. They're concerned about that the other side is going to miscalculate. They're also concerned that they themselves will miscalculate. In the absence of real diplomacy, in the words of Mike Mullen right before he left as chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff, the slightest misunderstanding between two parties who have not communicated with each other properly for 30 years is very likely. And that miscalculation, that misunderstanding leads to miscalculation. When you miscalculate, you escalate. It's a very bizarre situation in some ways, because if you compare it to what existed during the Bush administration, I don't think you have any element in the Obama administration that actually wants war. And I don't think you have leading elements in Iran that want war. But the course that we are on, nevertheless, is driving us toward that end, unless there is a real renewed effort at diplomacy. And with that, I just want to say, not another exchange of ultimatums. The diplomacy that we have had has not been the type of negotiations in which parties really come in, reassess their red lines, reassess their assumptions. It's been more of an exchange of ultimatums. Not to say that it wasn't genuine, it just wasn't the right form.